Picture this, you're standing on the rusty red surface of Mars, looking up at a pale blue dot in the night sky. That tiny speck is Earth, your former home, the place where everyone you've ever known still lives. And here's the shocking truth that space agencies don't advertise. If you're on Mars right now, you're probably never going back. If you're curious about the mysteries of space exploration, make sure to subscribe to this channel and give a thumbs up. Now let's begin this journey. When we talk about Mars missions, we often hear about the journey there. The 7 to 9 months of traveling through the cosmic void, the landing challenges, the first steps on another world. But there's a darker reality that most discussions conveniently skip over. The physics, biology, and economics of Mars travel create a perfect storm that makes return trips not just difficult, but potentially impossible for most who make the journey. Before we dive deeper into why Mars might become humanity's ultimate one-way ticket, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me bring you more mind-blowing content about our universe and our place within it. Together we're exploring questions that define our species' future among the stars. Let me share something that changed my perspective on Mars colonization forever. During a recent interview, Elon Musk casually mentioned that the first Mars settlers should be prepared to die there, not from accidents or failures, but from old age after living full lives on the red planet. This wasn't pessimism, it was physics. You see, every rocket equation tells the same story. The amount of fuel needed to escape a planet's gravity increases exponentially with the mass you're trying to lift. On Earth, with our thick atmosphere and strong gravity, we've mastered this challenge through decades of innovation. But Mars presents a unique problem that flips our entire space travel playbook upside down. Think about it this way. When you travel to Mars, you're not just going on a trip. You're essentially falling down a gravitational hill that takes enormous energy to climb back up. And unlike Earth, Mars doesn't have the infrastructure, the fuel production facilities, or even the raw materials readily available to build the massive rockets needed for a return journey. The Artemis program and SpaceX's Starship development have given us incredible insights into what Mars travel really entails. These aren't just engineering projects, they're attempts to rewrite the fundamental rules of human existence. When NASA's Perseverance rover landed in Jezero Crater in 2021, it carried out an experiment called MOXIE that produced oxygen from the Martian atmosphere. This tiny device, no bigger than a toaster, represents our first baby step toward making Mars survivable. But survivable doesn't mean escapable. Here's where the story gets even more fascinating. The human body, this incredible machine that evolved over millions of years on Earth, begins to change the moment you leave our planet. Astronauts on the International Space Station experience bone density loss, muscle atrophy, and cardiovascular changes after just 6 months in space. Now imagine what happens after a 7-month journey to Mars, followed by years living in gravity that's only 38% of Earth's. Your bones would become brittle, your muscles would shrink, your heart would literally become smaller and weaker. Recent studies from NASA's Human Research Program show that after just 1 year on Mars, an astronaut's body might be so adapted to Martian gravity that returning to Earth could be physically devastating, if not impossible. But wait, couldn't we just exercise our way out of this problem? Astronauts on the ISS spend hours each day working out to combat these effects. Surely Mars colonists could do the same? Well, here's where hope meets harsh reality. The ISS is only 400 kilometers above Earth. Help is always just a Soyuz capsule away. On Mars, you're an average of 225 million kilometers from home, with a communication delay of up to 24 minutes each way. When something goes wrong with your exercise equipment and in space, everything eventually breaks. You can't just order a replacement part from Amazon. The psychological impact of this isolation is something we're only beginning to understand. Antarctic research stations, our best Earth-based analogues for Mars colonies, have shown us that extreme isolation can fundamentally change how humans think and behave. But at least Antarctic researchers know that a plane can evacuate them if needed. Mars colonists would live with the constant knowledge that Earth is not just far away. It might as well be in another universe. Let me paint you a picture of what the first Mars colony might actually look like, based on current mission plans from SpaceX, NASA, and other space agencies. Imagine a cluster of pressurized habitats partially buried under Martian regolith for radiation protection. Solar panels stretch across the rusty landscape, dusty and requiring constant maintenance. Inside, colonists live in spaces no bigger than a modest apartment, recycling every drop of water, every breath of air. This isn't science fiction, this is science fact, based on real engineering constraints and human needs. The Mars Design Reference Architecture, NASA's detailed plan for human Mars missions, acknowledges that early missions might need to be one-way, simply because the infrastructure for return trips won't exist. But here's what really keeps me up at night when I think about Mars colonization: the economics. Sending 1 kilogram of anything to Mars currently costs tens of thousands of dollars. A return rocket, even a small one, would mass hundreds of tons. The fuel alone would require either massive shipments from Earth or years of production on Mars using technology we're still developing. Who pays for this? Who decides who gets a ticket home? The financial reality of Mars colonization reveals an uncomfortable truth that venture capitalists and space enthusiasts rarely discuss openly. Every Mars mission plan includes detailed budgets for getting there, setting up life support, and establishing basic infrastructure. But when you look for the line item labeled "Return Journey," you'll find either astronomical numbers or conspicuous silence. SpaceX estimates that their Starship could eventually reduce Mars transportation costs to around $200,000 per person. That sounds almost reasonable until you realize this is just for the one-way ticket. The infrastructure needed to produce methane and liquid oxygen fuel on Mars for a return journey would cost billions to establish. And that's assuming everything works perfectly on the first try, something that has never happened in the history of space exploration. You might be thinking, but surely technology will advance. We'll figure out better ways to travel between planets. And you're absolutely right to be optimistic. Human ingenuity has overcome seemingly impossible challenges before. But there's a cruel irony at play here. The very advances that make getting to Mars easier also make staying there more attractive. Consider the concept of in situ resource utilization, or ITSRU, basically living off the land on Mars. Every breakthrough in extracting water from Martian soil, every success in growing food in Martian greenhouses, every advance in producing building materials from the regolith makes Mars more livable. But these same technologies that ensure survival also reduce the pressure to develop return capabilities. Why spend billions on return rockets when you could invest in making Mars a better place to live? The European Space Agency's ExoMars program and China's Tianwen missions have revealed fascinating details about Mars that both excite and concern scientists. The planet has water ice at the poles and possibly liquid water underground. It has all the elements needed to support life. But it also has global dust storms that can last months, radiation levels that would fry unprotected human DNA, and an atmosphere so thin that your blood would literally boil if you stepped outside without a pressure suit. These discoveries paint a picture of a world that's simultaneously more habitable and more hostile than we imagined. It's a place where humans could potentially thrive, but only by completely reimagining what it means to be human. And that brings us to perhaps the most profound reason why Mars travelers might never return. They might not want to. Imagine spending years of your life building a new world from scratch. Every greenhouse you construct, every tunnel you dig, Every life you help bring into the world on Mars represents an investment of blood, sweat, and tears that can't be measured in dollars or euros. The psychological concept of the sunk cost fallacy suggests we value things more when we've invested heavily in them. But on Mars, it wouldn't be a fallacy. It would be survival. The first generation of Mars colonists won't just be living on Mars, they'll be creating the foundation for a new branch of human civilization. Their children, yes, people will have children on Mars, will be the first true Martians. Born in lower gravity, raised under alien skies, these children might be physically incapable of visiting Earth even if the technology existed. Their bones, muscles, and cardiovascular systems would be optimized for Mars, not Earth. This brings us to a bioethical dilemma that keeps philosophers and scientists awake at night. Do we have the right to create a generation of humans who can never visit their species' home planet? Is it ethical to give birth to children who will be forever exiled from Earth by the very nature of their biology? Recent studies from the International Space Station have shown that mammalian reproduction in low gravity faces serious challenges. Mice embryos developed in microgravity showed significant abnormalities. While Mars has some gravity, we simply don't know if human pregnancy is possible there, or what long-term effects Martian gravity would have on developing fetuses. The first Mars babies will be unwitting participants in the ultimate experiment. But let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the one that connects every human who's ever looked up at the stars and wondered about our place in the universe. Mars isn't just another destination, it's potentially our species' first step toward becoming truly cosmic. And like every great migration in human history, it might require leaving the old world behind forever. The Polynesians who settled the Pacific Islands often made one-way journeys into the unknown. The difference is that they could theoretically build another boat and sail home. Mars colonists will face a barrier not of distance, but of physics, biology, and economics combined. NASA's current Artemis program aims to return humans to the Moon as a stepping stone to Mars, but even NASA administrators privately acknowledge that the Moon and Mars are fundamentally different challenges. You can launch from the Moon with a relatively small rocket. The lunar module that brought Apollo astronauts home had a mass of just 4,700 kilograms. A Mars return vehicle would need to be orders of magnitude larger and more complex. The Mars Sample Return mission, currently in development, aims to bring back just 0.5 kilogram of Martian rocks. This mission requires multiple spacecraft, years of preparation, and billions of dollars. If returning 0.5 kilogram of rocks is this challenging, imagine the complexity of returning a human being who needs life support, food, water, and living space for the journey. The story of Mars colonization takes an even more dramatic turn when we examine the actual mission architectures being developed right now. Behind closed doors at NASA's Johnson Space Center, SpaceX's Starbase facility, and research institutions worldwide, engineers are grappling with equations that tell an uncomfortable story. Every calculation, every simulation, every test points to the same conclusion. The easiest way to solve the Mars return problem is to not solve it at all. Let me share something that shocked me when I first learned about it. The concept of Mars Direct, proposed by aerospace engineer Robert Zubrin in the 1990s, was revolutionary precisely because it acknowledged this reality. Instead of planning elaborate return missions, Zubrin suggested we focus on making Mars livable. His calculations showed that for the cost of one round-trip mission, we could send 5 one-way missions with far more supplies and equipment. This isn't giving up on bringing people home. It's accepting that home might need a new definition. When European settlers sailed to the Americas in the 1600s, most knew they'd never see their birthplace again. The difference is that Mars settlers won't just be leaving their country or continent, they'll be leaving their entire world, with a gulf of space so vast that even radio messages take up to 44 minutes for a round-trip conversation. The radiation exposure during the journey to Mars alone is sobering. Astronauts would absorb about 600 millisieverts of radiation, 300 times the annual limit for workers in the nuclear industry. But that's just the appetizer. Mars's thin atmosphere and lack of a magnetic field mean colonists would continue accumulating radiation exposure every single day. After a few years on Mars, returning to Earth might not just be impractical, it might be medically inadvisable due to the increased cancer risk from another interplanetary journey. Current spacecraft shielding technology can only do so much. The Orion capsule, designed for deep space missions, uses a combination of aluminum and polyethylene to protect astronauts. But effective shielding adds mass, and mass is the enemy of space travel. Every kilogram of shielding means less food, less water, less equipment for survival. It's a devil's bargain that mission planners face with every design decision. But here's where human adaptability enters the equation in ways that might surprise you. Recent studies on astronauts have shown that the human body can adapt to extreme environments in unexpected ways. Scott Kelly's year in space revealed genetic changes that scientists are still trying to understand. Some of these adaptations might actually help humans survive on Mars, but they could also make returning to Earth more difficult or even dangerous. The vestibular system, your inner ear balance mechanism, completely rewires itself in low gravity. Astronauts returning from just 6 months on the ISS often can't walk properly for days. After years on Mars, colonists might find Earth's gravity not just uncomfortable, but genuinely disorienting to the point of being debilitating. Imagine feeling like you weigh 2.5 times your normal weight every moment of every day. That's what returning to Earth would feel like after adapting to Mars. The technological challenges of producing return fuel on Mars deserve their own discussion. The Sabatier reaction, which combines hydrogen and carbon dioxide to produce methane and water, sounds simple in theory. But implementing it on Mars requires equipment that can operate reliably in an environment where the average temperature is -80 degrees Fahrenheit. Dust storms can last months, and the nearest repair shop is millions of miles away. SpaceX's plan involves sending robotic missions ahead to begin fuel production before humans even arrive. These robots would need to produce roughly 900 tons of propellant for a single Starship return journey. That's not a typo, 900 tons. To put this in perspective, the entire International Space Station, the largest structure humans have built in space, masses about 450 tons. We're talking about producing twice that mass in fuel on Mars, using technology that's still largely theoretical. The power requirements alone are staggering. Current estimates suggest you'd need a 10-megawatt power plant running continuously for over a year to produce enough fuel for one return vehicle. On Mars, where solar panels operate at reduced efficiency due to dust and distance from the Sun, this means acres of solar arrays or nuclear reactors, infrastructure that would take years to establish and maintain. But perhaps the most overlooked challenge is the human factor. Psychological studies on isolated communities show that after about 2 years, groups develop their own microcultures, distinct from their parent society. Mars colonists wouldn't just be physically separated from Earth, they'd be culturally and psychologically diverging with each passing day. The Mars 500 experiment, conducted by Russia, China, and the European Space Agency, 6 volunteers in a simulated spacecraft for 520 days. Even in this controlled environment, knowing they could leave at any time, participants experienced severe psychological stress, depression, and interpersonal conflicts. Real Mars colonists would face these challenges without any possibility of early exit. Communication delays would fundamentally alter how Mars colonists relate to Earth. Imagine trying to have a conversation where every response takes between 8 and 48 minutes to arrive, depending on planetary positions. No real-time video calls with family. No immediate tech support when systems fail. No live streaming of Earth events. Mars colonists would experience Earth's history in delayed chunks, always living in Earth's past while creating their own future. This temporal disconnect would profoundly impact decision-making. When faced with critical choices, Mars colonists couldn't simply call mission control for guidance. They'd need to develop autonomous governance, independent problem-solving protocols, and their own chains of command. Over time, asking Earth for permission or advice would become not just impractical, but irrelevant. The medical realities of Mars living present another barrier to return. Without Earth's protective magnetosphere and thick atmosphere, cosmic radiation would gradually alter colonists' DNA. Cancer rates would increase, cataracts would develop earlier. The immune system, evolved over millions of years to fight Earth pathogens, would adapt to Mars's sterile environment. Returning to Earth's bacteria and virus-rich biosphere could be catastrophic for immune systems that have forgotten how to fight terrestrial diseases. The reproductive challenges on Mars open up questions that sound like science fiction, but are grounded in hard biological reality. We know that radiation damages DNA, and Mars colonists would be swimming in a sea of cosmic rays and solar radiation that Earth's magnetosphere usually deflects. Every cell division, every pregnancy, every child born on Mars would be rolling genetic dice in ways we're only beginning to understand. The University of Tokyo's recent experiments with freeze-dried mouse sperm on the ISS showed significant DNA damage after just 9 months in space. Now imagine human reproduction after years of Mars exposure. But here's what's truly mind-bending. Even if we solve all the technical challenges, even if we develop revolutionary propulsion systems, even if we create perfect radiation shielding, there's one barrier to return that might prove insurmountable: time itself. The optimal launch windows between Earth and Mars occur roughly every 26 months. Miss your window and you're stuck for another 2 years. But mission planning requires preparation years in advance. By the time a colonist decides they want to return to Earth, constructs or waits for a return vehicle, and waits for the right launch window, 5 to 10 years could easily pass. In that time, lives change dramatically. Relationships form and dissolve, children are born, communities develop. What started as temporary becomes permanent through the simple passage of time. The colonist who wanted to return might no longer exist, replaced by someone whose life, family, and purpose are now Martian. Recent psychological studies on expatriate communities show that after 7 years in a new country, most people report feeling more connected to their adopted home than their birthplace. On Mars, where every breath of air and drop of water represents a collective triumph over a hostile environment, this psychological shift would likely happen even faster. You don't just live on Mars, you survive it together, creating bonds forged in the crucible of shared adversity. The economic model of Mars colonization adds another layer to this one-way journey reality. Unlike historical colonization, where ships could return with gold, spices, or other valuable cargo to justify the expense, Mars has nothing that would be economically viable to transport back to Earth. The most valuable thing Mars could export would be knowledge, scientific data, technological innovations, and perhaps most importantly, proof that humans can survive beyond Earth. This creates what economists call a remittance economy. Mars colonists would be essentially funded by Earth with no expectation of material return on investment. But how long would Earth's governments and populations support spending billions on Mars when there are pressing needs at home? History shows that public support for expensive space programs wanes over time. Apollo landed humans on the Moon 6 times, but budget cuts ended the program with 3 planned missions cancelled. The Mars colony would need to become self-sufficient not just for survival, but for political and economic independence. This transition from outpost to autonomous society would be the final nail in the coffin of any large-scale return missions. Why would an independent Mars spend its limited resources sending people back to Earth when it could use those same resources to improve life for those who stay? Let's talk about something that space agencies don't like to discuss publicly, the liability issue. Every astronaut who's spent significant time in space has experienced health impacts. NASA tracks these carefully but rarely discusses the long-term implications. Bone loss, muscle atrophy, vision problems, cardiovascular changes, increased cancer risk. The list reads like a medical textbook of aging-related conditions, except it happens to healthy adults in their 30s and 40s. Now imagine the legal and ethical implications of bringing Mars colonists back to Earth after years of adaptation to Martian conditions. If a returning colonist develops severe osteoporosis and breaks multiple bones simply from walking in Earth gravity, who's responsible? If their weakened cardiovascular system fails under Earth's gravitational stress, is that a predictable outcome that should have prevented their return? These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They're based on real medical data from long-duration spaceflight. The insurance industry, which underwrites many space activities, has already started grappling with these questions. Current policies for space tourists specifically exclude coverage for long-term health effects. For Mars colonists, the situation would be even more complex. No insurance company would cover the health risks of returning to Earth after years on Mars. This financial reality alone could make return journeys impossible for all but the ultra-wealthy. But here's where the story takes an inspiring turn. What if being unable to return to Earth isn't a bug but a feature? What if it's exactly what humanity needs to truly become a spacefaring species? Every great leap in human evolution and migration has required burning bridges with the past. Our ancestors who left Africa didn't have round-trip tickets. The humans who crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas couldn't go back when the ice melted. Mars represents humanity's next great migration, and like all migrations, it might require the courage to leave the old world behind. The colonists who accept this reality won't be victims of circumstance. They'll be pioneers of the highest order, trading their Earth citizenship for something far more profound, the chance to be founders of a new world. The Chinese space program recently announced plans for a permanent lunar base by 2035, with Mars missions to follow. Their planning documents notably focus on permanent settlement, rather than exploration and return. This isn't pessimism, it's pragmatism based on physics, biology, and economics. They're planning for success by accepting reality rather than fighting it. The emotional weight of this decision cannot be understated. Imagine standing in the launch facility on Earth, saying goodbye to family and friends, knowing with mathematical certainty that this is the last time you'll breathe Earth air, feel Earth gravity, or touch Earth soil. The psychological screening for Mars colonists will need to be unlike anything we've done before. We're not just selecting for technical skills or physical fitness. We're selecting for people capable of accepting permanent exile as the price of making history. Recent interviews with astronaut candidates for Mars missions reveal a fascinating split. About half say they'd go even knowing they couldn't return. The other half say the possibility of return is essential to their participation. But here's the interesting part. When pressed about specific scenarios where return might be impossible, many in the second group start to waver. The dream of Mars is powerful enough to override the instinct to preserve an escape route. The transformation of humans into Martians won't just be cultural or psychological, it will be evolutionary. This isn't science fiction speculation. It's based on what we already know about how organisms adapt to new environments. The lower gravity, higher radiation, different atmospheric pressure, and unique mineral composition of Mars will exert selective pressures on human biology in ways that would make Charles Darwin's head spin. Within just a few generations, Martian humans might develop denser bones to compensate for lower gravity, more efficient cardiovascular systems that work better in reduced pressure, and possibly even enhanced DNA repair mechanisms to deal with radiation. These aren't comic book mutations, they're the kind of subtle adaptations that allowed our ancestors to develop different skin colors, body types, and disease resistances as they spread across Earth. Except on Mars, these changes would happen faster due to the more extreme environmental pressures. Dr. Scott Solomon, an evolutionary biologist at Rice University, has modeled how humans might evolve on Mars. His work suggests that within a few hundred generations, or perhaps 6,000 years, humans could be physiologically distinct enough to have difficulty breeding with Earth humans. That's evolution creating a reproductive barrier between two populations of the same species, eventually leading to speciation. We're talking about the birth of Homo martinis, a new branch on the human family tree. But we don't need to wait millennia to see the point of no return. Within a single generation, Mars-born children would face insurmountable challenges visiting Earth. Imagine being born and raised in 38% gravity. Your bones would be lighter, your muscles leaner, your heart smaller. Earth's gravity wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it could be lethal. Your cardiovascular system, perfectly adapted to pump blood in Martian gravity, might fail under the crushing weight of Earth's pull. These Mars-born children would be the first humans truly native to another planet. They wouldn't dream of returning to Earth any more than you dream of returning to Africa, because your distant ancestors evolved there. Earth would be a foreign world, glimpsed only through videos and stories, as alien to them as Mars seems to us now. The legal and political implications of permanent Mars settlement are staggering. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, signed by over 100 countries, states that no nation can claim sovereignty over celestial bodies. But that treaty was written when space was for visits, not for living. What happens when babies are born on Mars? What citizenship do they hold? Which laws apply to them? International maritime law provides some precedent. Babies born in international waters typically receive citizenship from their parents' nation. But Mars colonists would likely come from many countries. Over time, the practical necessities of governing a Mars colony would require new laws, new systems, and eventually new sovereignty. The first Mars Constitutional Convention might be just decades away. This political evolution would create yet another barrier to return. Once Mars develops its own governance, its own laws, its own identity, why would it prioritize sending people back to Earth? The resources required for return missions would compete directly with life-sustaining infrastructure. Every kilogram of fuel produced for a return rocket is a kilogram not used for heating habitats or producing water. The technical challenges of maintaining life support systems on Mars illustrate why focusing on settlement rather than return makes sense. The environmental control and life support system on the ISS costs about $3 billion and requires constant resupply from Earth. It's designed to support 6 people. A Mars colony would need to support hundreds, eventually thousands, using only local resources. The closed-loop life support systems required for Mars would be marvels of engineering. Every molecule of water would be recycled dozens of times. Human waste would become fertilizer for crops. The carbon dioxide exhaled by colonists would feed plants that produce oxygen. These systems would be so finely balanced, so interconnected, that removing people from the equation, sending them back to Earth, could actually destabilize the entire colony ecosystem. Recent advances in bioengineering offer fascinating possibilities for making Mars more livable, but they also raise ethical questions about the return journey. Scientists are developing crops optimized for Martian soil and atmosphere. These wouldn't just be regular plants grown in unusual conditions. They'd be genetically modified organisms designed specifically for Mars. Colonists eating these crops for years might develop gut microbiomes adapted to process these unique foods. Returning to Earth's agricultural products could cause severe digestive issues. The same goes for the manufactured materials colonists would live with daily. Mars concrete made from regolith, metals extracted from Martian ore, plastics synthesized from the carbon dioxide atmosphere, all would have slightly different properties than their Earth counterparts. Colonists' immune systems would adapt to this environment. Coming back to Earth would be like traveling to a foreign country and getting sick from the local water, except multiplied by 1,000. Let me share a historical parallel that puts this in perspective. When Polynesian navigators settled remote Pacific islands over 1,000 years ago, they brought pigs, chickens, and crops from their homeland. Within generations, these organisms evolved into distinct island varieties. The settlers themselves developed unique cultures, languages, and even physical adaptations. When European explorers rediscovered these islands centuries later, they found populations so distinct that return to the original homeland was culturally and practically impossible. Mars colonization would be this same process on steroids. The isolation would be more complete, the environmental pressures more extreme, and the technological requirements for survival more demanding. Unlike Pacific Islands, where you could theoretically build a boat and sail away, Mars would trap its colonists with physics itself. The psychological adaptation to permanent Mars residency reveals itself in surprising ways. Studies on submarine crews, Antarctic researchers, and astronauts show that humans in isolated, dangerous environments develop what psychologists call psychological ownership of their space. They become intensely protective of and connected to their life-supporting habitat. For Mars colonists, this wouldn't be a temporary assignment, it would be existential. The habitat wouldn't just be where they live, it would be what keeps them alive. This deep connection to place would extend to the Martian landscape itself. The first colonists to watch a Martian sunrise, to weather a dust storm, to discover subsurface water would be creating humanity's first emotional connections to an alien world. Their children, born under salmon-colored skies, would find Earth's blue sky bizarre and unsettling. Home is where you're born, where you grow up, where your formative experiences shape your identity. The role of artificial intelligence and robotics in Mars colonization adds another dimension to the one-way journey problem. As colonies develop sophisticated AI systems to manage life support, conduct repairs, and make split-second decisions during emergencies, they'll become dependent on technology specifically designed for Mars. These systems would be trained on Martian data, optimized for Martian conditions, integrated with Martian infrastructure. They couldn't simply be packed up and moved to Earth any more than you could transplant a coral reef to a mountaintop. The energy economics of Mars-Earth travel reveal perhaps the most sobering reality of all. Every kilogram launched from Earth's surface requires about 9 kilograms of fuel. But here's the kicker. Mars's lower gravity doesn't make the return journey proportionally easier. You still need to achieve escape velocity, still need to carry life support for months, still need to slow down when approaching Earth. The Tsiolkovsky rocket equation doesn't care about your homesickness, it only cares about mass ratios and exhaust velocity. Recent calculations by aerospace engineers show that a fully fueled Mars return vehicle would need to mass approximately 400 metric tons. That's just the vehicle and fuel, not counting the industrial infrastructure needed to produce, store, and transfer that fuel. We're talking about building the equivalent of a small oil refinery on a planet where the atmospheric pressure is less than 1% of Earth's and the temperature regularly drops below -100 degrees Celsius. But the story gets even more complex when you factor in the cascade of dependencies. To produce fuel, you need power. To generate power at scale, you need either massive solar arrays that can survive dust storms or nuclear reactors. Both options require maintenance, spare parts, and skilled technicians. Every system you add to enable returns is a system that could fail and doom the entire colony. From a risk management perspective, it makes more sense to invest those resources in redundant life support systems rather than escape vehicles. The documentary Goodnight Oppie about the Mars rover's spirit and opportunity showed us something profound about how humans relate to Mars exploration. These robots, designed for 90-day missions, operated for years beyond their planned lifetime. Engineers at JPL spoke about them like family members. Now imagine that emotional connection multiplied by 1,000 when it's not robots, but your children, your community, your life's work thriving on Mars. The psychological pull to stay would be overwhelming. Speaking of rovers, the data from Curiosity and Perseverance has revealed that Mars's weather patterns are even more extreme than we initially thought. Dust devils can reach heights of 20 kilometers. That's twice as tall as commercial airplanes fly on Earth. Global dust storms don't just reduce solar panel efficiency, they create static electricity fields that could fry electronics. Any return vehicle sitting on the surface would need constant maintenance just to remain functional. After a few years of exposure, critical systems would degrade beyond repair. The materials science challenges alone boggle the mind. Seals and gaskets designed for the 9-month trip to Mars would need to remain flexible and airtight after years of exposure to Martian conditions. The temperature swings from -125 degrees Celsius at the poles in winter to 20 degrees Celsius at the equator in summer would cause repeated expansion and contraction. Metal fatigue, seal degradation, and electronic component failure would accumulate over time. It's like expecting your car to start perfectly after sitting in the world's worst parking lot for 5 years. But here's something that rarely gets discussed in public forums about Mars colonization: the role of microbial life. Whether Mars currently harbors life or not, humans will inevitably bring Earth microbes with them. These organisms will adapt to Martian conditions in unpredictable ways. We've seen this happen in Earth's most extreme environments, bacteria evolving to eat concrete in nuclear waste sites, microbes thriving in boiling acid pools. On Mars, our microbial hitchhikers would face selective pressures unlike anything on Earth. Within years, the colony's microbiome would diverge from Earth's. This isn't just academic. These microbes are essential for digestion, immune function, even mood regulation. Colonists would develop immune systems calibrated to this new microbial ecosystem. Returning to Earth's microbial soup could trigger massive immune responses, allergic reactions, or worse. The recent discovery of perchlorates in Martian soil adds another wrinkle to the return problem. These chemicals, toxic to humans but potentially useful for rocket fuel, would accumulate in colonists' bodies over time. NASA's Mars Sample Return Mission protocols include elaborate containment procedures to prevent Martian material from contaminating Earth. Now imagine those same protocols applied to returning humans who've been marinating in Martian chemistry for years. Financial markets are already pricing in the one-way nature of Mars colonization. The emerging space insurance industry offers policies for satellite launches, space tourism, even asteroid mining. But when asked about insuring Mars colonists' return journeys, underwriters literally laugh. The risk models break down completely when dealing with the uncertainties of years-long Mars exposure, followed by interplanetary travel. No rational financial institution would bet on successful returns. This creates a feedback loop that makes returns even less likely. Without insurance, who bears the liability for return missions? Not private companies focused on their bottom line. Not governments already stretching budgets to fund initial colonization. The colonists themselves? They'll be too busy trying not to die on Mars to accumulate wealth for a return ticket. The educational implications of permanent Mars settlement fascinate me. Children born on Mars would need to learn Earth history, geography, and culture from textbooks and videos, never experiencing it firsthand. Imagine learning about oceans when the only water you've known comes from underground ice, studying weather patterns when you've never felt rain, reading poetry about seasons on a world where a day is 24 hours and 39 minutes long, and a year lasts 687 Earth days. These Mars-born children would develop their own cultural touchstones. The first Martian music wouldn't just be Earth music played on Mars. It would reflect the unique acoustics of pressurized habitats, the rhythm of different day lengths, the emotional landscape of a rust-colored world. The first Martian literature would explore themes Earth authors could never imagine. Culture, once diverged, rarely reconverges. The medical technology required to keep humans healthy on Mars would evolve along different paths than Earth medicine. Bone density treatments that work in low gravity might be dangerous in Earth gravity. Cardiovascular adaptations that help in a thin atmosphere could cause problems at sea level pressure. Mars medicine would become a distinct discipline, creating another barrier between the two populations. Consider the pharmaceutical implications. Drugs metabolize differently in altered gravity. The ISS has shown us that even simple medications like aspirin work differently in space. Mars colonists would need drug regimens specifically calibrated to their environment. After years of adapted dosing, returning to Earth would require complete pharmaceutical recalibration, assuming Earth drugs would even work properly in Mars-adapted bodies. The cognitive changes from long-term Mars residents represent another underexplored barrier to return. Studies on astronauts show that spatial reasoning, navigation, and even basic problem-solving can be affected by extended time in altered gravity. The brain, remarkably plastic, rewires itself for new environments. Mars colonists would develop cognitive patterns optimized for life in enclosed spaces, limited resources, and constant danger. The wide open spaces of Earth, the abundance of resources, the relatively safety might actually be psychologically overwhelming. The social dynamics of Mars colonization present a fascinating case study in how human relationships evolve under extreme conditions. Unlike any migration in human history, Mars colonists would be selecting their entire social universe. The few hundred or thousand people in your colony wouldn't just be neighbors. They'd be the only humans you could physically interact with for the rest of your life. Every friendship, every romance, every conflict would be permanent in ways Earth dwellers can barely comprehend. Research from the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, where crews live in Mars-like conditions for months, reveals how quickly social hierarchies form and solidify in isolation. But those volunteers know they're going home. Real Mars colonists would need to create entirely new social contracts, knowing that walking away from a bad relationship or job wouldn't be an option. The colony would become a pressure cooker of human dynamics with no release valve. This social intensity would forge bonds stronger than anything on Earth. When your survival depends on others maintaining life support systems, growing food, and repairing critical infrastructure, trust becomes more than social nicety. It becomes existential necessity. The thought of leaving these people, your literal lifeline, to return to Earth's billions of strangers would feel like abandoning family in a crisis. The communication dynamics between Mars and Earth would create a unique form of cultural evolution. With message delays ranging from 8 to 44 minutes round trip, real-time conversation becomes impossible. Mars colonists would develop their own slang, their own inside jokes, their own cultural references that Earth wouldn't understand. Language itself would begin to diverge, just as American English diverged from British English, but accelerated by isolation and unique environmental pressures. Imagine trying to maintain a relationship with someone when every conversation has a built-in delay longer than a TV episode. Your Earth-based family would age in discrete jumps between video messages. You'd miss birthdays, weddings, funerals in real time, experiencing them weeks later as historical documents. The emotional distance would grow with each passing year until Earth relationships became more like following a historical documentary than maintaining living connections. The infrastructure required just to keep Mars colonists alive makes return missions look like fantasy. Every habitat module, every greenhouse, every water recycling system represents millions of dollars and thousands of hours of human labor. These aren't temporary camping facilities, they're permanent installations built to last decades. The capital investment in Mars infrastructure would be so enormous that dismantling it for return missions would be economically insane. Let me paint you a picture of what a 20-year-old Mars colony might look like. Underground tunnels carved by boring machines connect pressurized habitats. Vast greenhouses stretch across the landscape, their specialized glass filtering harmful radiation while maximizing photosynthesis. Nuclear reactors hum steadily, providing baseline power that solar panels supplement. 3D printers work around the clock, turning Martian regolith into building materials. This isn't a base, it's a city representing trillions of dollars of investment and immeasurable human effort. The sunk cost fallacy becomes sunk cost reality. Every improvement to life on Mars makes leaving less logical. Why abandon the fruit trees you've coaxed to grow in Martian soil? Why leave the children's playground you built with your own hands from native materials? Why desert the cemetery where you've buried friends who died building this new world? The colony becomes sacred ground, sanctified by sacrifice and achievement. Recent studies on terraforming Mars have revealed the sobering truth about planetary engineering. To give Mars an Earth-like atmosphere, we'd need to release about 10 million billion kilograms of carbon dioxide, roughly 10,000 times the current atmospheric mass. Even the most optimistic proposals involving releasing CO2 from the polar caps and regolith would only achieve about 15% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. We're not talking about centuries to terraform Mars, we're talking about tens of thousands of years, if it's possible at all. This means Mars colonists aren't waiting for conditions to improve before going home. They're adapting to Mars as it is, not as we wish it could be. Every generation would become more specialized for Mars survival, less capable of Earth return. Its evolution in fast forward, driven by technology rather than pure biology, but evolution nonetheless. The philosophical implications stretch our understanding of human identity. If home is where you're born, where you grow up, where your formative memories crystallize, then second-generation Martians would be as alien to Earth as Earth is to us. They wouldn't be humans living on Mars, they'd be Martians of human descent. This isn't semantic games, it's a fundamental shift in identity that would make return a meaningless concept. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter offers an interesting sidebar to our story. Many Mars mission architectures include asteroid mining to support the colony. But here's the thing. Once you're mining asteroids from Mars, why would you ever go back to Earth's deep gravity well? Mars becomes not an endpoint but a launching pad for human expansion throughout the solar system. The colonists wouldn't be trapped on Mars, they'd be freed from Earth. Historical precedents on Earth show us how permanent these separations can become. When humans first crossed from Asia to the Americas over 15,000 years ago, they didn't maintain contact with their homeland. For over 14,000 years, the Americas developed in complete isolation from the Old World. The Mars-Earth separation would be less absolute in terms of communication, but more absolute in terms of physical travel. The Tasmanian Aboriginals provide an even more striking example. When sea levels rose 10,000 years ago, cutting Tasmania off from mainland Australia, the two populations diverged completely. They developed different tools, different languages, and different cultures. When Europeans arrived, Tasmanian technology had actually regressed from their mainland cousins due to isolation and small population. Mars colonists would face similar pressures to adapt rather than advance certain technologies. The economic model for Mars colonization increasingly assumes one-way travel. The Mars Society, the Planetary Society, and even NASA's own economic analyses show that return missions increase costs by factors of 10 to 50. That money could instead fund more colonists, more equipment, more redundancy in life-critical systems. From a species survival perspective, 50 one-way colonists contribute more to establishing a self-sustaining Mars population than 5 round-trip explorers. Private companies are already building business models around permanent settlement. SpaceX's revenue projections for Mars transportation assume one-way tickets. They're not selling round-trip cruise packages, they're selling new lives in a new world. The economic incentives align entirely with permanent settlement, not temporary visits. The psychological point of no return might come sooner than the physical one. Studies on immigrants show that after about 2 years in a new country, the psychological home begins to shift. For Mars colonists, risking everything to establish a foothold on a hostile world, this shift would be even more pronounced. The shared trauma and triumph of survival would create bonds stronger than mere geography. When the first child takes their first steps in Martian gravity, when the first couple exchanges vows under alien stars, when the first colonist is buried in Martian soil, the colony transforms from outpost to home. These milestones wouldn't just be historical footnotes, they'd be emotional anchors making return unthinkable. The genetic engineering revolution happening right now on Earth adds a mind-blowing dimension to Mars colonization. CRISPR technology and its successors might allow us to edit human genes for better radiation resistance, more efficient oxygen use, or stronger bones in low gravity. But here's the ethical minefield. Any genetic modifications that help survival on Mars would likely make Earth return even more difficult or impossible. We'd be literally engineering humans who can't come home. China's recent experiments with gene-edited babies shocked the world, but they pale compared to what Mars colonization might require. Imagine parents faced with a choice: let your Mars-born child suffer from low-gravity effects, or edit their genes for Mars optimization, knowing this locks them out of Earth forever. It's not science fiction, it's a decision that might face colonists within decades. The pregnancy and childbirth challenges on Mars deserve their own horror movie. On Earth, pregnancy relies on gravity to help position the baby for birth. In Mars's 38% gravity, we simply don't know if natural childbirth is even possible. The few experiments with pregnant mammals in low gravity show disturbing abnormalities. Caesarean sections might be mandatory, but surgery in low gravity with limited medical facilities, that's a risk multiplier we can barely calculate. Even if babies can be born successfully on Mars, their development would be unlike anything in human history. The inner ear, which governs balance, develops in response to gravitational forces. Mars children might never develop Earth normal balance. Their proprioception, the sense of where your body parts are in space, would be calibrated to Mars gravity. Bringing them to Earth wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it could be developmentally catastrophic. Recent data from the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution mission shows that Mars is still losing atmosphere to space. The planet lacks a magnetic field to protect it from solar wind, which strips away atmospheric molecules. This means Mars isn't just hostile now, it's becoming more hostile over time. Any dreams of easy terraforming slam into this reality. Colonists aren't waiting for conditions to improve, they're racing against planetary decay. The resource allocation ethics on Mars would make Earth's most contentious debates look trivial. Every resource spent on return capability is a resource not spent on survival. Imagine being a colony administrator choosing between funding a return rocket prototype or upgrading the water recycling system. When that decision could mean life or death for colonists, the choice becomes obvious. Return missions would always lose to immediate survival needs. Let's talk about something space agencies desperately want to avoid discussing: sex and reproduction on Mars. Humans are going to be human regardless of planet. But pregnancy in a high-radiation, low-gravity environment isn't just risky for the mother. It could produce children with significant disabilities. The colony would need to make agonizing decisions about reproductive rights, genetic screening, and whether bringing children into such a hostile environment is ethical at all. The first Mars miscarriage would be a watershed moment. The first infant death from Mars-specific conditions would force colonists to confront the brutal reality of raising children on an alien world. These tragedies wouldn't just be personal, they'd be species-defining moments that force us to question whether humans should reproduce on Mars at all. And if we can't reproduce, is it really colonization or just an elaborate form of extinction? Food production on Mars reveals another layer of the one-way journey. Growing crops in Martian soil requires extensive chemical treatment to remove perchlorates and add nutrients. The plants that survive would be fundamentally different from Earth crops, potentially nutritious, but chemically distinct. After years of eating Mars-grown food, colonists' gut bacteria would adapt. Their nutritional needs might shift. Returning to Earth's food supply could cause severe digestive issues or nutritional deficiencies. The closed-loop nature of Mars life support creates dependencies that Earth dwellers can't fathom. On Earth, if your local water treatment plant fails, you can truck in water from elsewhere. On Mars, if your water recycling system fails, you're drinking your remaining supplies while frantically trying to repair irreplaceable equipment. Every colonist would become an amateur life support engineer by necessity. The technical knowledge required just to survive on Mars would create a population so specialized that adjusting to Earth's abundance would be jarring. Recent advances in artificial intelligence suggest that Mars colonies might develop AI systems far beyond anything on Earth. When your AI assistant can mean the difference between life and death by predicting equipment failures or optimizing resource usage, you push the technology to its limits. These Mars-specific AI systems would become so integrated into daily life that functioning without them would be like asking someone to navigate without GPS after using it for decades. The cultural artifacts of Mars would be unlike anything in human history. Music composed for the acoustic properties of pressurized habitats. Art created from the limited palette of Martian materials. Literature exploring themes of isolation, survival, and transformation that Earth authors couldn't imagine. These wouldn't just be Earth culture transplanted, they'd be uniquely Martian expressions of human creativity. Mars fashion would evolve from pure function. When every piece of clothing needs to be manufactured locally from limited materials, when tears or wear could be life-threatening in an EVA suit, fashion becomes engineering. The aesthetic sensibilities developed on Mars, likely favoring durability, efficiency, and repairability, would seem alien to Earth's throwaway culture. A Mars colonist returning to Earth would find our clothing wasteful, fragile, and bizarrely ornamental. The the governance structures on Mars would necessarily differ from Earth's democracies. When a bad decision can kill everyone, when resources are so limited that pure market economics could mean death, new forms of government would emerge. These might blend technocracy with communalism, expertise with collective decision-making. A Mars colonist accustomed to this governance returning to Earth's messy politics would face culture shock as severe as any physical adaptation. Sleep patterns on Mars would reshape human circadian biology. With a day 39 minutes longer than Earth's, colonists would gradually drift out of sync with Earth time. Over years, this would affect hormone production, metabolism, and neural patterns. The Mars day-night cycle would become their new normal, making Earth's 24-hour cycle feel rushed and unnatural. The spiritual and religious evolution on Mars presents fascinating questions. Would Earth religions maintain their hold when you can't face Mecca for prayers? When Sunday becomes meaningless without Earth's weekly cycle? When the night sky holds no familiar constellations? New spiritual movements would likely emerge. Perhaps venerating Earth as a lost paradise or finding the sacred in the act of survival itself. These Mars-born beliefs would be incomprehensible to Earth believers. The economic reality becomes more stark when you consider currency. What value does Earth money have when you can't spend it on Mars? Colonists would develop their own economic systems based on actual resources: water, oxygen, food, labor. The abstract financial instruments that dominate Earth's economy would be meaningless when survival depends on tangible goods. A wealthy Earth person would be a pauper on Mars without useful skills. Recent robotic missions have shown us that Mars dust isn't just annoying, it's potentially toxic. The fine particles, smaller than talcum powder, contain reactive chemicals that could damage lung tissue. Every colonist would inhale some of this dust despite best efforts. Over years, their lungs would develop unique adaptations or scarring patterns. Returning to Earth's thick, humid air after adapting to thin, dry, dusty Martian atmosphere could overwhelm compromised respiratory systems. The timeline for colony self-sufficiency keeps getting pushed back as we understand more about Mars's challenges. Initial estimates suggested 20 years to basic self-sufficiency. Now experts talk about 50 to 100 years before a colony could survive without Earth support. In that time, 2 to 4 generations would be born on Mars. By the time true independence arrives, the idea of return would be as foreign as suggesting modern New Yorkers return to prehistoric Africa. The skill specialization required for Mars survival would create a population unlike any on Earth. Everyone would need to be part engineer, part farmer, part medic. The jack-of-all-trades mentality necessary for colonial survival would clash with Earth's hyper-specialization. A Mars colonist might be able to repair a life support system, deliver a baby, and grow potatoes, but would they be employable in Earth's narrow job market? The view of Earth from Mars would fundamentally alter colonists' perception of humanity's place in the universe. Unlike the famous pale blue dot photo taken from beyond Neptune, Earth seen from Mars would be close enough to sometimes see continental features, yet far enough to emphasize our cosmic isolation. Colonists would watch Earth go through phases like the Moon, sometimes seeing the lights of cities on the night side. This daily reminder of separation would reshape their psychological connection to humanity's birthplace. Imagine watching Earth during major events, seeing hurricanes form and dissipate, watching the lights go out during power failures, observing the planet without being able to help or participate. You'd become observers of humanity rather than participants, anthropologists studying your own species from an unreachable distance. This psychological shift from we to they when thinking about Earth would be irreversible. The technological divergence between Earth and Mars would accelerate with each passing year. While Earth develops faster smartphones and social media platforms, Mars would focus on life-critical innovations. A Mars colony might perfect closed-loop life support while Earth still argues about carbon emissions. They might develop revolutionary radiation shielding while Earth focuses on entertainment technology. These divergent tech trees would make colonists increasingly incompatible with Earth's infrastructure. Consider something as simple as user interfaces. Earth's touchscreens work poorly in thick gloves needed for Mars's cold. Voice commands echo strangely in pressurized habitats. Mars interfaces would evolve to use eye tracking, gesture recognition, or brain-computer interfaces out of necessity. A Mars colonist returning to Earth might find our smartphones as archaic as we find rotary phones, not because they're more advanced, but because they're adapted to completely different needs. The biological clock of adaptation ticks louder than most realize. Within 6 months, astronauts on the ISS show significant physiological changes. Within 2 years, bone density loss plateaus at about 10%. But that's in microgravity with extensive exercise countermeasures. On Mars, with partial gravity and limited exercise equipment, the adaptations would be different and potentially more permanent. There's likely a point of no return, perhaps at the 3-year mark, where the body has adapted so thoroughly that Earth gravity would cause organ failure. Recent studies on epigenetics, how environmental factors affect gene expression, suggest that Mars colonists wouldn't just be changing themselves, but their genetic legacy. Stress, radiation, altered gravity, and dietary changes can flip genetic switches that get passed to offspring. The children of Mars colonists might be born pre-adapted to Mars in ways we're only beginning to understand. They wouldn't just be raised Martian, they'd be epigenetically programmed for Mars. The children born on Mars would experience Earth the way we experience fantasy worlds in movies, familiar enough to understand, alien enough to feel impossible. They'd learn about blue skies they've never seen, oceans they've never smelled, rain they've never felt. Earth fairy tales would need translation. Little Red Riding Hood makes no sense when you've never seen a forest. The Little Mermaid is incomprehensible when water only exists in carefully rationed supplies. These Mars children would develop their own mythologies. Perhaps stories about Earth would transform into creation myths, the lost paradise from which humanity was expelled. Or maybe Earth would become the cautionary tale, the planet that used up its resources and forced humanity to flee. Either way, the emotional connection to Earth would be literary, not literal. The point where rescue becomes impossible is closer than most think. Current Mars mission plans assume a surface stay of 500 days or more. But what if someone becomes critically injured on day 10? The physics of orbital mechanics means you can't just launch a rescue mission immediately. You'd need to wait for the next transfer window, prepare a rocket, travel for 7 months, and hope the injured person survives over a year waiting for help. The brutal math says that after landing on Mars, you're effectively beyond rescue within days. This reality would shape colonist psychology profoundly. Navy submarines can surface in emergencies. Antarctic researchers can be airlifted out. Even the ISS is only hours from Earth in an emergency evacuation. Mars colonists would live, knowing that no amount of money, no government intervention, no heroic rescue mission could save them quickly. This ultimate self-reliance would create a mindset incompatible with Earth's assumption that help is always available. Memorial practices on Mars would bind colonists to their new world in ways mission planners rarely discuss. The first colonist to die on Mars would face a dilemma: ship the body back to Earth at enormous expense, or bury them on Mars. Practicality would demand Martian burial, but this creates the first permanent human connection to Martian soil. Within decades, Mars would have cemeteries, memorial gardens, places where loved ones rest. Asking colonists to abandon their dead would be like asking them to abandon their hearts. The philosophical shift required for permanent Mars residence challenges core human beliefs. Most cultures have some concept of returning to one's roots, going home, completing the circle. Mars colonists would need to develop philosophies that embrace permanent exile as a noble choice, not a tragic necessity. They might develop concepts like forward heritage, the idea that home is what you create for your descendants, not where your ancestors lived. Space agencies' current ethical guidelines assume temporary presence and minimal planetary contamination, but permanent colonization requires a different ethical framework. Is it wrong to contaminate Mars with Earth life if that contamination is necessary for human survival? Do we have the right to claim Mars for humanity? These aren't abstract philosophical questions for colonists. They're daily realities that shape every decision. The immune system adaptations alone could trap colonists on Mars. In Earth's biosphere, we're constantly exposed to millions of bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms. Our immune systems are in constant battle, maintaining a delicate balance. Mars's near-sterile environment would cause immune systems to atrophy like unused muscles. After years without pathogenic challenges, a colonist's immune system might overreact catastrophically to Earth's microbial soup, triggering fatal autoimmune responses. Recent research on the International Space Station found over 4,000 species of microbes despite extensive sterilization efforts. A Mars colony would develop its own unique microbiome, a mix of whatever organisms survived the journey and whatever mutations occurred in the Mars environment. This wouldn't just be academic interest. These microbes would be essential for digestion, vitamin production, and immune function. Colonists would become dependent on their Mars-specific microbiome for survival. The manufacturing capabilities on Mars would create dependencies Earth dwellers can't imagine. Need a replacement part? You can't order it from Amazon. You must either have it in storage, make it yourself, or adapt something else. This would create a maker culture far beyond Earth's hobbyist 3D printing. Mars colonists would become masters of improvisation, repair, and adaptation. The thought of returning to Earth's disposable consumer culture would be both practically and philosophically repugnant. Time perception would fundamentally alter on Mars. With different day lengths, different year lengths, and no meaningful seasons, colonists would need new ways to mark time's passage. Birthdays would become complex calculations. Holidays tied to Earth's seasons would lose meaning. New temporal rhythms would emerge, perhaps tied to dust storm seasons or orbital positions. These new time concepts would be one more barrier between Mars and Earth minds. The sensory deprivation of Mars would rewire colonists' brains in subtle but profound ways. No natural wind sounds, no bird songs, no rustling leaves. The sound environment would be entirely artificial, the hum of life support, the whistle of air through valves, the conversations of the same few hundred people. Colonists might develop enhanced hearing to detect subtle changes that could indicate equipment problems. Returning to Earth's cacophony could be overwhelming to the point of pain. The color palette of Mars, endless variations of red, brown, and butterscotch under a butterscotch sky, would reset colonists' visual processing. Studies on people living in monochrome environments show significant changes in color perception and processing. Mars colonists might develop ability to distinguish hundreds of shades of red while losing sensitivity to blues and greens. Earth's riot of color could be visually exhausting to Mars-adapted eyes. If you made this far, make sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. And if you enjoyed it, I am sure you will love this other video at the left side of the screen. The most complete video about Mars on YouTube. Discover how Mars formed, why it lost its magnetic field and thick atmosphere, how its surface features like Olympus Mons reveal a dramatic planetary past. See you there.